Hi, this is Chris Meyer of Cybermotion, and I want to share with you a technique we call instant sex. It's an easy way to add the puffy highlights and saturated colors that many romantically associate with the look of film. This grew out of a need of a way of making 3D renders look as good as well-shot film. You'd be surprised how flat many 3D renders look just straight out of the box. However, it can be used on almost any footage, even footage that was originally shot on film. So let me show you how. Here's an example of a 3D render that looks pretty good initially, but we can make it a lot better. The first thing you need to do is in the timeline panel, reveal the modes column. There's a few ways of doing that. After Effects 7 has a little icon down here that reveals modes. You can right or context click on the top of any column and pick modes, or you can use the keyboard shortcut of F4 to reveal the modes panel. The second thing you need to do is take the original footage and duplicate it so you have an extra copy on top. Now, pick a mode for that copy on top. Overlay is a really good example of something that instantly looks a lot more saturated and a lot richer in color. And again, this is before and after. If you take that copy on top and hit T to reveal its opacity, you can go ahead and scrub the opacity parameter to decide how much of this effect that you want. And again, different modes create different looks. Soft light creates a less intense look than overlay mode. There we go. Meanwhile, modes like add and screen create these really bright, blown out looks, and we'll show how to use those too. Now that's just one step of this process. The second step is adding some form of effect to that copy of that layer on top. Now if we were to take our main layer and we were to add something like a blur effect, blur and sharpen, fast blur, we'd just get a blurry image. Not very useful. However, if we pick the copy on top instead, the one that has a blending mode selected, and add blur to that layer, now when we increase the blurriness, we get these really puffy highlights instead of just a blurred layer, because the layer underneath is remaining sharp. This is with the effect off, this is with the effect on. And again, you can go ahead and select different modes, such as add to get a much more intense look, overlay to get a much more rich and saturated look. I'll put it back on screen for now. Now this is the basic way of creating a hotter, puffier look. But if you want to go even further, you can duplicate this layer one more time, and go ahead and set different modes for these two different copies. For example, screen is adding our puffiness. Let's put an extra copy on top in overlay mode. Hit T to reveal its opacity, and then blend it so we can go ahead and add some more shadows back into our piece. And again, this was our original footage, and this is now our process footage, which has a lot more of those puffy highlights. Now, frankly, I've cranked this up a bit more than I might use on a real job. I would probably scroll these back down a little bit so it wouldn't be quite as intense of an effect. But you can see how much this has improved the original footage and created more of that filmic look. And you can take this effect further if you want to. For example, sometimes I take the layer that's adding my highlights, like this layer here I change from screen to add mode. I'll even put something like a gamma effect on it, color correction, levels, and get just the highlights. Here, let's crank up the opacity. And pick just subtle areas that I want to have blown out, like just those highlighted areas right there. This is with my highlights and without my highlights. And now I've focused it very tightly by using levels and a little bit of a gamma on that layer that has the add mode applied. Now this trick works great on other footage. For example, in this composition, I've got a typical office scene with someone giving a speech, something you might have to do for an industrial or corporate video. Well, here I've already created two more copies of the layer with fast blur applied and chosen screen and overlaid mode just like we're using. Adding a little bit of screen adds those puffy highlights, particularly to things like the water jar here. Then adding the overlay mode adds a bit of richness, more saturated colors, just a more expensive look to the production. So if you're shooting something on a DV camera, this is a quick way to make it more look like it was shot on film. Again, this was before, this was after. Much richer look without really resorting to anything expensive. Weddings are another really obvious example of good footage to use this trick on. Here's a little bit of add mode to create those nice puffy highlights, and a bit of overlay mode to go ahead and create those rich saturated colors that we like. I mean, a look like that is money in the bank. You know, this is before, this is after. I mean, which one would you buy if you were a client?